Hello, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Naked Englishman, and my name is Richard Vobes, and this is the audio diary of my life for the 19th of August 2017, and it's coming up to 10 to 7 in the evening. How rather jolly is that? I've had a good day, I think. I've been out this morning. I went up to the where did I go? What's the name of the blooming place? I went up to Ditchling Beacon, right there, the highest point in East Sussex, and I think it's the third highest point along the South Downs, the whole 100-mile ridge of chalk and flint that stretches from Winchester to Eastbourne down here along the south coast, and what a splendid rolling hills ridge that is. And then I went to Ditchling Common to record a second video. I was recording a video, of course, and recorded a second video on the Common, looking for another gibbet. I went in search of a gibbet the other day for Jack Upperton, who was hanged for stopping the mail coming through, robbing the mail, I should say, near Burpham. And this time it was a character called Jacob Harris. Well, that was one of the aliases he had. He had various names, but that was the one that they used, I think, in the at the assizes when they came to the judgment of dispatching this bloke, Jacob Harris. He was a Jewish peddler, and it's so difficult to know from this length of time. 1734, I think it was, when he down on his luck, he went to rob, which of course there's no sympathy for somebody who does such a thing. He went to rob an inn. Actually, he went to find something in an inn. He was probably quite obviously poor, and he's probably down on his luck, and he's a peddler running across the Ditchling Common, and in one way you probably feel sorry for the bugger because he's down on his luck and he's got nothing, and they had no social security or any of that sort of thing, and so he robs this place, but he's caught by the landlord, and then he lashes out and kills him. Now, whether that was intentional, whether it was self-defence, we don't really know, but he did kill this chap, and then the wife and the maid. So 3 deaths as a result of this, but the landlord doesn't quite die, one Richard Miles. He doesn't quite die at the scene, and is able later to tell the authorities who it was, and the soldiers then go off and chase him. And this Jacob Harris hides in a chimney in a big, large country estate, and is found, and then taken to the assizes, and excuse me, and then later he is hanged for his heinous crime. And in the Times, I suppose, quite rightly so, and people would have come out and watched him. Pamphlets were printed about his hanging when it came out. There was plenty of notice, and people would write the terrible story of his life, which most of the time they didn't know, but nobody knew other than the individual, and so they just made it up and printed it and made a nice profit from it. That's the way it went back in those days. Nobody, and people would buy it, and those illiterate people who couldn't read, they were read to by people. Well, it's all very exciting. Anyway, so I went in search of that, and the pub that whether it's the site, it's not obviously not the same building or construction, it's on the same site, and probably within it there is the original timber frame, and on the outside it's all slightly modernised with brick and what have you. But effectively that's where the pub was, or part of it anyway. This wayside, what was it called? The Wayside Inn, which then became the Royal Oak later on. And it was all very interesting, but now the Royal Oak is empty, it's closed down, it's had boarded up windows, you can't go in, it looks a right mess. It looks like it's most likely going to be demolished, I should think. It's in a very sad situation, and on the edge of Ditchling Common, which is such a shame. But then near to that, and I had to search for it, was a post marking where the gibbet was. Again, the individual was hanged. He was hanged in Horsham, and then he was carted, his body hung in chains, he was carted back to the site of his crime, put on the roadside there, so that people would be could see that as a warning, do wrong and this is what happens to you. So you don't need to watch the video now because I've just told you all that happens. I struggled to find the bloody thing, but I did find it in the end. And it was okay, and both videos, they're okay. They are what they are. They're just quick, one-take wonders, really, because I'm trying to make so many. But I come away a little disheartened because I'm trying to remember the facts, and then the day before, you're filming something else, and then the day before that you're filming something. And I'm just aware that the videos that I'm making, that they are very loose and they're very free and they're very simplistic, and often I get the facts wrong. And then occasionally, I'll see some old documentaries and things and just think, I'm just making rubbish. They're not as good as as the Bald Explorer originally was. But they are getting views, and it's only by chucking out this content in this fashion that one can really keep the momentum going and get people to watch the things. Whether they ever make any money or whatever is another ball game. But that's how it goes. And then just now, as I was having my evening meal, I was watching some old 1970s stuff that's on YouTube, an old BBC documentary, W.G. Hoskins. What a professor! What a knowledgeable and interesting man he was. And he made this series. He's famous for a book which he published. I mean, he was obviously a university professor somewhere or other, but I've known him from having a copy of his book, and I think anybody who's interested in geography and the land and the environment must surely have Landscapes of Britain by W.G. Hoskins. I mean, it's a seminal piece of work. And then this series was really based on that book. His an exploration, I think they called it, by W.G. Hoskins. Absolutely fantastic. To see the landscape, and he's going around looking at the different bits of landscape. I watched 2 episodes, one about the Black Country and one about the sea and marsh in North Norfolk, around the North Norfolk coast, and the land and the reclamation of the salt marshes, and absolutely fantastic and fascinating. The churches, the abandoned churches where once villages had been and had disappeared by the Middle Ages, and yet the churches are still there, similar to some of the ones on the Romney Marshes down in Kent, and all of that just absolutely fascinates me. I end up buying these books, trying to read them, trying to remember them. At the moment I haven't had much time to sort of get back to the reading of these sort of things. I don't know whether I've been wasting my time trying to write children's books and trying to get these stories that are deep in my psyche out, these silly fantasy stories, and now, reverting back to the Bald Explorer and trying to tell the story of our history and visiting places and showing and telling and in my mind, failing terribly and putting on a poor show of my abilities, for one thing, because I know that I can make these things better, and filming them in such a cack-handed way, and yet, the response is very nice from people, and yet I know I can do so much better, and I ought to be doing better, and my craft seems to have turned into a little puerile. Now I know people will say, don't be hard on you. And I remember listening to a chap who said, the reason that artists are poor is because they spend too long trying to get perfection, and it's all subjective, that what other people find good is not necessarily what the artist thinks is good. And it's trying to find that happy medium. And I do get that, but of course you're also trying to satisfy your soul, or what makes you tick, so that you can look back and go, blimey, that was good. And I look back at the Bald Explorer, the proper ones, the early ones, the first 8 that I made, and I'm very, very happy. And even though they were the subject of what's the word I'm looking for? The subject of... I can't think of the word. It's when you want to do something and you have to make allowances, or it'll come back to me. All filmmaking is that you... it's so annoying. It's such a the English language is fantastic because there are words which say exactly what you mean, and this is one such word, and it's a very easy and well recognised word, and you probably know what I'm trying to say, and I can't, and it's that's frustrating as well. I can't think of the sodding term that I want, but when you're it begins with S, I think. I'm floundering, ladies and gentlemen. I'm floundering, trying to. What is it? You compromise. Begins with a C. Compromise. God, blimey. For all filmmakers, I've said this before, and many people have said it before, that filmmaking is about compromise. All the time you're compromised because you may not have the right weather, you may not have the access to the place, you may not have the landscape or the location exactly how you wanted it, or there may be aeroplanes going ahead, there may be people who are there, a football match going on that you can't get in. All the time you're compromised, that you have to make these compromises and go and try and tell the story. But ultimately, all these are challenges, and you get round the challenges and you end up making the programme, and it may not be how you envisaged, but it's the very, very best that you can do under the circumstances. And I suppose that under the circumstances, with my point-and-shoot stabilising GoPro type approach, where I'm compromising to the nth degree in order to bring something, a gleam of something to an audience and say, look, I could do this better, I could present this better, I could remember the sodding facts better, I could stop making mistakes. If only I done the research better, had the time to do the research, had time to write a script, had time to get up there with the camera and the equipment, have somebody to help me film it all. One could do it better, but I can't, because the way YouTube works, in order to get that audience you need, certainly in the early days. So it may be that one goes back once you have that audience, and once that audience is then going to be patient, and they like you, and they know that you can do better, and that you can, develop with it. So it's all compromise, and I just feel, but I feel, I don't know. I suppose if I was getting paid for it, it would be even worse. It would be even worse that I was selling out in some ways, although because I'm trying to get some money from it. So I don't know. It sounds very confusing. I know it sounds confusing, it's because I suppose I care about the art form that I'm trying to do, and my main thing is about communicating the enthusiasm, and very often I feel inhibited when I'm out there filming on my own. I want to ooze with enthusiasm. I want to grab people and say, look at this is fascinating, don't you agree? This is absolutely amazing. I want to get that over, and I also feel I fail in grabbing the attention. I feel, there's people about, there's a runner over there, there's somebody walking their sodding dogs, you're just about to do a bit, there's bloody people about. And it's not that I don't mind the people being there in the environment, it's, it's great that they are, but it's sort of off-putting when you want to be not just too straight-laced about it and say, hello, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just walking along here, and look at this is quite interesting. Because then you come over as some boring person. You want to come over, I do have a personality, and I feel that my personality is inhibited. I don't know why. Harriet said, it's a barrier, you've got to get over it somehow. And I said, yes, I know, but you do feel when there's people watching you holding a little stick in your hand with a camera and another stick, which is the microphone, or you've got it pinned to you and you're kind of talking to it, and you feel, on the one hand, I want to wipe away everybody else, and I want to be able to sort of say, hey, look at this, isn't this a marvellous thing? This is fantastic, because that's how. And if you're with one other, if you're with one other person, you can do it, because suddenly there is legitimacy. Anyway, I don't want to harp on about that, but that's the frustration of it. Again, you're compromising because because why should I care what other people think? Should just enthuse and get on with it, because what they're going to think is, he's making a program, he's doing some filming, it's fine. Why am I? I'm quite content to be dressed up in a silly outfit and walk around and make a fool of myself in front of people. So why can't I do it like this? I find that difficult when it's early in the morning. You've gone early in the morning to avoid all these people. You've gone there to get the lighting right as well. And then suddenly, one person turns up with a dog, and I just suddenly feel completely inadequate. And the lines I forget, and the facts drop out of my head. It's so irritating. But there you are. That's the way it is. So that's been going through my mind. There was something else I wanted to mention, but probably now the old brain is falling apart. Thanks to everybody who's... Oh, yeah, sorry. Brain. Come on, brain. Come on. I'm obviously getting a little bit... brain dead, I think. Tired. I was tired. I had a nap earlier today. Been up since 5, and I suppose the relentless thing of trying to get these things out, after a while, it's like most things. There's the sort of initial enthusiasm, and you work on nervous energy, and then you get to a sort of a threshold, I suppose, where your body's going, oh, hang on a minute. And then you get through that threshold of pushing yourself, and then you're able to carry on without it being a problem, because your body's learned to accept it and learned to know that this is how it's like doing a new job, or, when you start a new job and perhaps you've had to commute. And at first you think, yeah, no, this is easy, I can do this. And then it gets to, oh my God, I can't do this. And then somehow you get through both those sort of phases to the third phase where it's perfectly normal, it's every day. And maybe that I'm coming towards that first phase where firstly you get a bit tired and knackered, and then you get to the point where, no, it doesn't bother me at all. And I'm an early riser anyway, so I suppose what I'm trying to get at is there's so much I want to do. And I'm just frustrated that I get tired and unable to do it, that I want to read and I want to take you, my gentle listener, and grab you by the balls. Even those who don't have balls, I still want to grab you by the balls and take you on this journey of exploration and say, look, this is important, this is vital, we should be doing something about it, protecting our history and learning our history and looking at our heritage and exploring this wonderful country that is Britain. Everybody... it frustrates me that everybody wants to go abroad. They all want to go, oh, yeah, we'll go abroad, we'll go and sit in the sun and we'll do all this. And I just think this country, our nation, our land, has so much in it. It's so fascinating. The history of our place, not the kings and the queens necessarily, and all that, of course, has its intrigues. But just, the landscape, the places, the villages, the simple things are so important and so vital to where we are. And I do think that in this day and age of Twitter and Facebook and the immediate responses that we get from things, that and all this awful modernisation of everything, this awful urbanisation, this need to build boring, bland, ugly, unfunctional houses that are rabbit hutches that have no character and no joy necessarily, but that people are accepting this. They're just accepting it blindly because they don't know any different, because they don't know the history. They don't know how important it is and how much satisfaction and life and enjoyment you can get out of being in a property that is built from the materials in that landscape. Another of my great heroes is Alec Clifton Taylor, who says, so vividly and so vitally. He has a book that I bought, and I think I've mentioned this before. He wrote a book. I mean, he's dead now, poor bloke, but he wrote this book, and I picked it up in a second-hand bookshop a few years ago now with Harriet, and it's frustrating because I was telling Harriet about it, and she thought it was the most boring book in the world. She just didn't get it. And I get the fact that, of course, everybody has different tastes, and it's important that we all have different tastes, and what one person finds fascinating, another person finds boring. But to me, it just seems so fundamental to so much of life. And the book, and I know you'll find the same. You'll think, what a boring bit of book this is. And it's called, what is it? What is it called? It's called The Pattern of English Building or British Building, a pattern of building or pattern of building materials or something like that. I can't even remember the sodding title of this precious book by Alec Clifton Taylor. And I mean, chapters on bricks. Sorry, spat at the microphone. Then chapters on bricks, and but I know it sounds barking, and I know it sounds sad almost. But when you look, but the thing is, what makes this interesting and makes this so special is bricks make up a house. People live in a house. A house becomes a home. The aesthetics, is so important to people's lives, aesthetics. And part of the aesthetics is about, you take a lot of the timber frames buildings that we all find so charming and so lovely, and we love to look at them. You go to Shrewsbury and you'll see these timber frame buildings, and you go around Cheshire as well, and parts of Sussex, and all over you'll find these wonderful 500-year-old timber frame buildings. In Oxfordshire, in the Cotswolds, away from the Oolitic limestone, of course, you'll find these places that have these timber frame buildings, places where there's perhaps not enough sandstone and all the rest of it. And we you go, it's so lovely. But what makes them so right is the fact that they are in the area where there was an abundance of trees. So the cob fill or the wattle and daub fill between the timber frames all looks so right and is so right, and is because it's the building material of the environment. And what has gone horribly wrong is when the railways came in. The railways came in meant that manufactured goods could be transported, and particularly heavy manufactured goods like bricks that could be transported across the country, that all look uniform, which is what the Victorians did, and in some places just blighted. Now, over the 150 odd years ago that all of this happened, there are places where you get these terraces, and actually they look okay now. We're beginning to accept them. Because those manufactured bricks that are so uniform have weathered, finally, and they're beginning to take on the environment that they live in. And that suddenly, but that makes it acceptable, makes it kinder on the eye and important. And the same with and I've said this many times because I just think this is, when I read it, I just thought it was an amazing thing, that when you some of these larger houses, you go and visit some of these Queen Anne houses. The bricks then, of course, this period in the 17th century, whenever it was, is a time before the Victorians, before the Industrial Revolution, before the trains. So if you are going to build a house out of brick because that's the style that you want, those bricks have to come from somewhere. If the roads are rutted as they were and carts can't really bring them very far, then if it's possible you're going to build your house out of brick, you're going to look around at the area you're in, at the soil. Is the soil suitable? Is the clay good enough to make fired bricks? And if it is, and you decide that's what I'm going to do, and it's going to most likely to be the cheapest option for you, because if you're in an area where there is no sandstone or harder stone, there's no quarries to make your places in. Like some of the places in, in Shropshire, you'll see a lot of red sandstone, like the Abbey was made out of it, and certain quarries. But then out away from those sort of seams of that sandstone, where it was quite expensive, there's many of these houses that are made out of brick in the 17th century, and but of course what they've done is they've dug a great big hole where the clay was of the right consistency, and they've made up moulds out of little bits of wood, and they've made these bricks out of the clay in these moulds, these wooden moulds, and then they're fired. Sometimes I was told, I found out recently that they could stack them up and cover them in earth and stuff, and set fire on the inside so that they could fire loads of them standing still. And so they would fire these bricks where they were, then build the house to the design that they wanted, with, you know, however they were going to do it, and then you're left with this dirty great hole in front or at the back of the house. Well, they weren't stupid. They filled this. They carefully putted down the clay, and they filled it with water. Or they let it fill with water from rainwater, or it filled from natural springs, or came off the land. And you had a delightful lake at the back of the house. And, you know, you may have then used a bit of local timber and blah, blah, blah to finish it off in certain areas. And because you'd used local stone, you had something that looked right in the environment. And now when you go around and you look at the environment with these, you know, you're driving along, if you go towards Milton Keynes, for example, and you'd come onto the outskirts of Milton Keynes, where there's these huge, massive, huge boxes. Amazon have one of them. Huge nerve centres of very large online retailers. Great big metal, steel boxes, prefabricated, whatever they are. These shells of things, just ugly things, all over. And then you go into the city, and you see this metal and glass, and these dread, and you know the problems we're having with these skyscrapers at the moment, or the tower blocks rather, not skyscrapers. Ugly, boring, I mean, it's just it's so offensive, and the architecture now is so awful that, you know, architects. The problem, it seems to be, that we've had natural architecture, timber frame buildings, for example, natural, just look right, just look perfect. You know, it was wood from the environment, thatched roofs, just fantastic. Then you went through more designed architecture, and you have people who studied aesthetics and knew what looked good, and so you had your Queen Anne stuff, and then you had your Palladian architecture coming in, which was based on not sort of anything to do with England, but based on, you know, Romanesque and Grecian architecture, but styles that was mathematically correct, that had an aesthetics that just looked great. And then that was built up, you know, the Georgians took that, and the Georgian architecture was just so simplified but stunning. Just, you know, and Shrewsbury has many Georgian houses, and they're simple in shape, the symmetry, but just and out of, again, local brick, and just gorgeous, just gorgeous in their simplicity, and yet their grandness, and they're just wonderful. And then you go to the Victorian period, and some of the Victorian stuff is just downright ugly. It's just downright. It's like they try to cram in so many different styles in red brick, where they can manufacture this stuff. And some of it is just ugly, and yet a lot of it does have a certain charm. And you know, some of the Victorian villas are beautiful, and it may be that the distance in time has done that. But now, you know, since the 50s, I mean, the 30s was interesting with the Art Deco, bringing in curves and you know, that sort of shape, sort of stuff, and the 40s began to, you know, start losing it. But some of those 1940s you see in the films of the war films, the 30s really it was, of course, the 30s stuff, but you see them in the war films, these old 30s houses and stuff, you know, have their own sort of suburban beauty about them. And then you get into the 50s and there's panic, because we've got to rebuild after the war. In the 50s and 60s, they bring in the concrete and this instant fix, which is out of necessity, I suppose. But there's an essence of this utilitarianness that's come in. And now it just, you see these shops and are so utilitarian, just, supermarkets that are barely anything. They're just almost out of a kit form. The irony is, of course, that the builders who built things back in the Georgian period and before, they had these books, they had these building patterns that they would say, well, do you want a Palladian frontage, or do you want a portico with Doric columns? Do you want this look or that look, and blah blah blah, and a cornice with this? Do you want the? And they would just have these building patterns that a pattern of building in England and Wales. I think that's what it's called. Alec Clifton Tower, Pattern of Building in England and Wales. I think that's the title. And they would have these pattern books. And of course now it just looks like we have the same, but these incredibly just computer generated. It's almost as if architects don't actually do it at all. It's just, this is the space, and your computer algorithm will just spit out, well, you can have this, or this. Which one do you want? Well, and they're all, somehow the algorithm has worked out that they're all ergonomically fine to maximise the space. There's no proud. You look at some of those Georgian, but the Victorian. Some of those Victorian. There was a market hall in Shrewsbury. Fussy, funny building, but immensely proud building. And I wish it was there today. They demolished it and they put in another building which had more space on the inside. And it's as ugly as anything. It's just foul. And it's repulsive. And it's right in the heart of Shrewsbury. And it's such a shame. And yet they had this, and they built in 1860, I think it was, knocked down 100 years later in 1960, and they put in some monstrosity in its place. And do you know, my heart bleeds when I see this. The 1960s was such Worthing had a town hall. Now, arguably, people say it was an ugly thing, but with a clock tower on it and all the rest of it. But this happened all over the country, with just bulldozed around to make more space. And we seem to be doing it more and more. We just seem to be able to build up, and the sprawl of places just awful. I'm sorry, I've just gone on and on. I realise I've just gone on and on about this. And so, but the point I suppose the point I'm really trying to make is that history and architectural history, and I'm no expert, I just have this emotional feeling, this emotional need to try and tell people that, hold back. There's this whole debate about bringing in migrants and all the rest of it into Europe, which appalls me because of the culture clashes. And then there's this whole business that we're having to build more and more houses, and we're just sprawling everywhere. And there was something like I read or heard that there was 300,000 migrants and people coming into this country, and we've had to build 300,000 more houses, and we're having to eat up the countryside. We're having to eat. Well, it's not going to die and disappear in my lifetime, but for the generations beyond me, my children and my children's children, what we have is so precious, and the design and the look of stuff is so precious, and yet we're bulldozing it away, and we're hiding it. All of the wonderful stuff, and we only have to look at why people go to places like Shrewsbury, like Chester, like Arundel, like any of these places that have charm and loveliness, is because these things are old. That's why they're going. They're not going to Milton Keynes and dreadful towns like that because the architecture is so wonderful. And took somebody, one of my listeners, to Cirencester the other week, and what an amazing and beautiful town that was. People aren't I harp on about it, but people aren't going to these goddamn awful places with the urban sprawl and these terrible rabbit boxes that are built around the side of the place. For that, they're not going for that. They're going for the old. So why architects just can't get it into their thick head that what they're making, nobody gives a shit about. Nobody wants to see their crappy modernistic thing, because like pop music these days, like anything these days, it's so empty and devoid of meaning that it'll be out of date in 10 years. Buildings that have gone up in Worthing, there's a building nearly opposite me, called the Waffle House. I call it the Waffle House. Some dreadful, modernistic, crappy building for social housing that went up over in place of a rather beautiful, that was knocked down, a rather beautiful Victorian pub called, well, I forget what the original name of it was called, but it became the Flappers Bar, or what was it called? And now they've built this monstrosity, and originally they put in these glass fins that were supposed to, look good, and of course they got dirty with the seagulls just crapping on them. No foresight to think that they would get so shitty and would be difficult to clean, and no practical way of doing it. So in the end, they removed those things which were sort of part of the overall look, and I despair. I just despair, and I just don't think, in the race for the modernisation, we just seem to be losing the goodness we've had. I'm sorry, I don't know how I got onto this track, and clearly I am getting into the bitter old man territory. It's terrible, but I suppose it's because I care so passionately. And coming back to my first point, having watched W.G. What the flipping heck his name is, Hoskins, is that I want to try and show people that it is, that we do still have a lovely place, and I just wish I was able to do it better than I'm doing it now. Just frustrated by not being able to tell the story in the best possible way. And also that I don't know enough, and I don't have the time to read. There's so much I want to learn and so much I want to communicate. It's just very frustrating. I have bored you so badly. I am so sorry on this episode of The Naked Englishman. Thank you very much for listening, and I will catch up with you on the next one. Until then, thank you very much, and goodbye.